We've been fighting a long time, and we have all lost so very much, so many loved ones gone. But you are not alone. There are pockets of resistance all around the planet. We are at the brink. You have no idea how important you are. If you're listening to this, you are the resistance.
Ave Maria Stella Dei Mater Alma Atque semper Virgo Felix te porta.
Hey everybody, Steve Fidel coming at you once again with Michael Greaney and Don Brohawn of the Center for Economic and Social Justice, Mea Culpa. And if you like their swag, I got their owned or be owned t-shirt on, which probably will get you to some questions if you walk in the shopping markets in your local areas, which they are. I do like this one. I like the orange. Kind of reminds me of WWF when Hulk Hogan went bad, the New World Order group, but this is solid. Good. Thanks to you guys for putting it together. I don't buy it though.
Don was walking down the street in D.C. with an owner be owned t-shirt, and some people were stopping and says, "Oh, I love that." I'm not sure they knew what it meant, but they loved it.
Yeah. Well,
your follow-up, what did you vote for then?
Ownership. I was just going to say, you look really good in that t-shirt, Steve.
Oh, yeah. I do know that, yes.
Yeah.
It's like
It
Will
looked
Smith.
better if the orange were
what's the
green
difference between you and I make this look good.
Just try walking down the street sometime, see what kind of reaction you get. It is a conversation starter.
Oh, no, yeah, exactly. Like, I like this. And today we're recording on the 2nd November, so it is election day in most everywhere in the United States, and that'd be great to walk into an election. Might wear that into the election booth and go see what someone says. Oh, what does that mean? Well, what did you vote for today? Did you vote to be owned or be owned?
Exactly. And, funny that you mentioned that, because that whole issue, own or be owned, relates to what we're going to be talking about today.
That's right. What are we talking about today?
We're talking about the 5 levers of change, the things in human society that can bring about cultural, economic, social, political change when at a point where crises are occurring. And we want to emphasize some of the what we would say the 5 most significant and most powerful and most rapid tools for changing society.
And so we don't become David Letterman on a countdown. What are these 5?
Okay, these 5 would be education, politics, money and credit, tax policy, and technology. And while you grab a bite to eat, that's okay.
You're killing me. I have the screen off so no one can see that.
Yeah, it's fun. And the key thing here is all these things in and of themselves, they are social tools, and they're morally neutral. It depends on how you use your tools, and it depends on whether you as an individual and all individuals in society have control over these things or have some power or some choice, or whether someone else is dictating that for you. And we can see, for example, in education, you can teach people a lot of different things, and some of them are not going to be good for the individual or for society. And you can see this in destruction and division, hatred, war, all sorts of things. Politics, it's the same thing. Mike will explain more the roots of what we call politics. But in and itself is a way that people determine, how rules are going to be made, how resources will be available or divided up, many things, how individuals have a connection to the decision-making processes in society at various levels. Money and credit. Now, that's an institution which few people really understand, including the people in Congress. Whenever they have the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, most of them don't even know what to say. They don't even know how to ask a question. But we know that this is shaping not only this country, but the entire world. And again, this will tie into the idea of own or be owned. If you have access to money and credit of the right sort, or you do not. Tax policy, this is something also, it can bring about change by encouraging certain types of behavior or penalizing. But the point of taxation is legitimately is to cover the costs of government, because yeah.
See, I was gonna say you were kind of stuttering on is, and I was trying to hit the right button back over going, your taxation is theft.
Yeah, no, I know, and this is a word that triggers a lot of emotion, but we want to look at what, is this something that is needed? If you think that government is unnecessary, then there's no point in having taxation. If you think that it is necessary in order to make sure that people aren't victimized by their neighbors or whatever, or cheated or murdered or whatever else, then you need government there. And as it was once said by a founding father, the best government is that which governs least. But you still have to pay the cost of people who are working at the, police, firemen, teachers. And then there's technology. And that's become something which has become a source of fear for people there in their future. And if you look at what technology, the logic behind it is never to make more work for people. The idea is to be able to do less work, hopefully using fewer resources. But again,
or if
the
you're
problem
the Zuck
is
to live in a fantasy land and on your computer.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a moral choice here in how we develop it, who has access to it, who will control it. So that goes back to the whole question of, do you own it? And if you don't, then whoever does own these things, and that means control and have the rights to the fruits of, they're going to control you. So that's sort of an introduction to this particular show that we're doing today.
Yeah, and I should emphasize that this particular show is the culmination of the entire discussion we've been having, over the previous 9 episodes of, it assumes as a given that we are going to be applying the principles of the just third way of economic personalism. The reason why so many people look with fear on just about almost every one of these, economics, politics, money and credit, tax policy, and technology, is because they're not approaching it from the right framework of analysis, which is, of course, since this is about economic personalism, we're going to say economic personalism. Every single one of these, if it's done the wrong way, will take you off, and you'll see the disaster that we have, created in our world today. Thank goodness this is a spam call.
Speaking
it's
of
election day, so they're going to be flooding in every minute here. I've been getting calls late at night that are nothing. But anyway, and this is another one of the things that economic personalism will solve. It will grant us each so much power that we can take out the stupid phone and we'll never get another spam call again.
Yeah, right.
Or someone will invent a technology that when a spam call comes in, you press a little button on your phone and a loud shriek goes over the other side.
I think the idea of your car being turned off because you went 5 kilometers too far is more apt than that.
Well, actually, I don't like that one, but I do like the idea of switching to something like hydrogen fuel, so you don't have to hear people talk about, we have to drill under your house and take your land away or do something else. You want to talk about climate change? Well, let's talk about free energy, or almost free energy compared to the fossil fuels, which probably we need those as a standby and a backup and an emergency. Why use them? Hydrogen is the most common element in the entire universe. And here I am talking about that rather than the 5 levers of change.
Yes.
But that's because COP26 is going on, and there's 400 private jets out there telling you how to live, while they do the complete opposite of what they want you to do.
Yeah, but the main point that I wanted to make is that this whole show assumes that you've seen the previous 9 and that you're operating within the framework of analysis in which we're presenting these 5 levers of change. Otherwise, you'll just hear what we're saying and say, oh, well, we know all about that. The government takes care of that, or we know how that works. Especially the 2, probably the most important 2 are money and credit and tax policy. The 2 most misused institutions in the modern world, in my opinion.
Yes, and I would just like to comment that, as Mike was saying, depending on which framework you're starting from, if you are operating within what we call the wage welfare system, which includes every system and school of economics today other than economic personalism, whether it's market-based economics, or it's socialist, or it's monopoly capitalist, underlying those paradigms is the idea that most people will be able to earn a living by selling their labor, or maybe it's being taken away from them and they're forced to provide their labor. But otherwise, it's going to be the government will control, or a few elite will control. And we certainly see there's now a partnership between the government and the top 0.01%. So in terms of what ownership, when we talk about that, we're looking at what the owner is entitled to by right. So we talk about property and private property. And why this is so significant is that will tell you who should be entitled to the fruits of what the thing owned is producing, and who should have control over the thing that is producing. So with that, if we look at education, for example, if you're being educated to be a wage earner, or if that doesn't turn out a welfare recipient, and if the point of education is to teach you to be able to get, so that when you graduate, you get a good job, then the problem arises on several fronts. One is it's not teaching you the idea of being an independent, self-sufficient individual and family. It's saying you're going to be depending on either a private employer or the government for you to be able to pay your bills, to feed your family, to have a roof over your head. So we would challenge the institution of education at all levels, that it's really not teaching people to be free human beings, not full human persons. So we want to look at that institution. And when Mike mentioned the 2 most important, these are all important, but in terms of bringing about the most rapid pace of change, money and credit and tax policy will do that the quickest, but always education is essential. That when you shift to a new paradigm, people have to understand it. People have to make it theirs. It has to become part of the culture. So that's essential. So, and similarly, politics, there's politics within a wage welfare system. There's politics within a truly democratic economy and political system, where people have this source of power through owning. And this is very key to what we're talking about with economic personalism, is we produce with our labor, and we produce with the things we own. And it's those things we own that are becoming increasingly more significant in terms of what's produced in the economy. So we can't ignore, as much as the human person is really the thing of ultimate value within the social order. That's where power starts, dignity starts. But we have to also see there's human beings as total beings, and then there's labor, which is each person's capacity to be able to produce goods and services to be sold. And we know there's a wide range of abilities with, your labor power. And to a certain extent, you can get more education to improve it. But by and large, we are born with, a certain capacity from an economic standpoint. Capital, however, and touches on the technology aspect of this, is constantly improving. And now we see it's accelerating the improvements. And when I say improvement, the goal is to reduce the amount of human effort, toil, resources. So that's good if you're an owner. It's not good if you're the person supplying the labor and you get replaced. So these things, as Mike will talk more about, we have to look at it in terms of, do you have power or does someone have power over you?
I thought Mike was just looking at it. I thought Mike
I'm going, okay, Mike, it's your turn.
Okay. On Don's point, you think about like cops back in, say, 1910s that were traffic control. They didn't have stoplights, so they were in the middle of the street. The technology comes out and eliminates that job. So why is that okay? But say like the same thing happens at the McDonald's. Not saying go to McDonald's, that's poison for you, but you got the kiosk there, and that will eliminate the human workers. Which there was a McDonald's. We were getting chicken nuggets for the kids one day, and I told her, as bad as I hate this idea of this technology coming in like this to eliminate the human person, I don't mind it at this because they were that bad. But it's not that's going to eliminate a lot of people. It gets into UBI talk, and again, every time I talk to you guys, I immediately go back to Davos. Every syllable you guys said, I'm going, yep, that's what it. If anybody's listening is paying any attention, your radar is going off, going, I understand what she's talking about. It's going back to this, and she's not even bringing that up.
I'm glad that you did, Steve.
Well, we have to save something for the next series. I mean, come on.
No. The point, I think, and you mentioned universal basic income and how a group of the world's elite, they were selected and they come together to think out solutions to save the planet and to save the economy and eliminate war. And, I think the objectives are good. The question is, though, how they're going to go about doing that. And in none of the proposals was the idea of extending equal access to ownership of those things which are producing wealth and income in the economy, more so than labor. So I think that, your example of McDonald's becoming more automated, frankly, I happen to like when I go to restaurants seeing a friendly human face. But, then again, think of the people who are working at McDonald's, how much they're able to earn or not earn, and how many hours of their lives are spent there, when they could be doing something that they truly love. I really doubt that most people love working in a fast food restaurant for, many, many hours. It's greasy, it's hot. You got customers who yell at you, honestly, that's so Louis Kelso, who developed the ideas with Mortimer Adler of economic justice, defining the system principles of economic justice, and also the methodology that would enable people who have nothing, no ownership of things, no cash reserves, no savings, to be able to acquire those new technologies and pay for them through the profits of the technologies themselves. So he's someone who said that if a machine can do your job better, than you can, own the machine. No one loves doing repetitive. I don't care what they say. I don't think the people working, farm workers who are out in the fields or factory workers who are standing in an assembly line doing the same thing over and over, I really doubt. I mean, there may be some who enjoy that, but my suspicion is most would prefer doing something else. So then the question is, all right, if, I think another thing is if you want a free market, to give maximum choice to buyers and to sellers in terms of what they want to provide and what they're willing to pay for something, the only way to really have a truly free market, you have to have justice in there. And the only way you can have justice is where power is spread broadly among every individual. And that way people will be truly free to make choices versus be forced by necessity to do things that they really don't want to do. And it may be harming them, it may be harming their families. So, your point about Davos is it's important. Who's going to make the decisions for us and for the world? Is it going to just be this tiny elite, or will we be empowered and educated in order to make better choices, for ourselves, our families, society, et cetera?
Yeah, and then there's another little item that these people pushing for the UBI and the billionaire tax and all of these other things forget. It can't work. It's very easy. Run the numbers. There's not that much money around. The vast amount of the wealth of these super rich is not in the form of cash. I mean, you don't see, Walt Disney's Scrooge McDuck swimming around in his money bin filled with money. If you ask the super rich how much cash do they have, it's actually very little. I would say that a lot of the super rich have less cash than we do. The average person, an upper middle class, that sort of thing, even though I detest those terms. But it's in the form of their ownership of assets. And this is where the bulk of their wealth is. In order to fund the UBI or the billionaire tax or anything, they have to sell their wealth, which they're not going to do. And you're talking about a financial collapse if you dump that much equity on the market, even over months at a time. It would make the 1929 crash look like a walk in the park, because you're talking a total financial meltdown, because in order to liquidate their assets, they have to sell them to somebody. Who has the money to buy it? Nobody. They're the rich. When the rich sell something, who can buy it? Nobody thinks of these things. The only real answer is not universal basic income, but, put it in a slightly wrong way, universal basic ownership. Everyone has to have access to the opportunity and access to the means to become owners of income generating capital so they can be productive and generate their own income, not take income from other people. This is the only way an economy can really work. It sounds very well to say, oh, well, so-and-so has $1 billion a year. His wealth grew by $1 billion, most of which is not in cash. So we'll just redistribute that to other people so that they can get the consumption income they need. No, the only way to keep an economy viable is for everyone to be productive. And the only way everyone can be productive is to own capital, because anyone can own. Not everyone can labor, and not everyone's labor is even needed. In a modern economy, it's ownership of the technology that's important. And that can only come about if you have the right monetary system, the money and credit, and the right tax system. And people are educated sufficiently to understand what the heck is going on. And of course, putting in politics, get the politicians and the country's leaders to help organize our institutions in the right way so that this can be done. This is, in fact, the job of the politicians is to care for the common good. And the common good is made up of all these institutions, this vast network of social habits, social tools in which we as human beings become more fully human, or as Aristotle would put it, more virtuous. And we can't become more virtuous or more fully human if we don't have power, and power naturally and necessarily follows property. Not just any property. I mean, it's not ownership of consumer goods, it's ownership of capital goods, technology.
Are you telling me politicians are basically corrupt and they go up in DC? They're for us, the people, right? They're not. Surely you're not saying they're going up there and making millions off of
Well,
us, and then
let me, the politicians are for the people, the collective concept. But the people is an abstraction created by human beings for human beings and has no independent existence apart from the human minds that create them. So the politicians, for our own good, have to control our minds, our lives, our thoughts, and everything else. Otherwise, it won't work.
I'm being sarcastic. I know there's one or two
So
good
am
ones
I.
out there, but I was thinking like Pelosi's making millions for being a servant of the people.
Yeah,
I
well,
have no objection to them making millions, just not out of me.
Right. Just like you want to make $1 million, do it. Do it ethically, do it virtuously, things like that.
Well, and I think it's important to, look at the mindset of basically two dominant ideologies. And one is elitism and one is collectivism. And let's start with the collectivists, which are, I would say that's largely influencing how policies are being made today. And it's becoming more and more collectivist because more people are becoming unable to earn their own a decent living. So it becomes a question of who knows best for these poor suffering people. And it's we, the politicians, and we can, hire the experts and we can develop policies to make sure that we give people just enough so they stay alive. So they get their minimum wage, they get, whatever their enough support to cover health and education and shelter. And so you take power away from the individual with the idea being, we know what's best for you. The other is the elitist who, for, in various ways has made it to the top of the ladder. And sometimes it is through personal talent, maybe a combination of good fortune. It's never completely by yourself, even though some may think they're self-made, men and women. It's always with other people involved. So they also are in a position where, they can be benevolent or they can be as selfish as they want to. It doesn't matter because they have power. So the third, what we're talking about with personalism, as described by Pope John Paul II and Martin Luther King too. It's interesting. I'd like to trace sort of the common origin of their thinking on personalism, is really looking at each human being as both a unique individual and a member of society. And when you take away one of those things, their uniqueness or their being part of this human family, you are really denying them the means to develop fully as a human person, which must recognize both aspects of human nature. So the only way really to do that is to make sure that every person has power, is sovereign, but then you have the problem of all these billions of sovereign human beings. How do they interact with each other so that the result is constructive and positive and not destructive? And that is difficult because, part of economics, it recognizes there are a certain amount of resources available at any particular time. There's a certain number of consumers and producers, and it's not like we have everything immediately supplying our needs, our infinite needs. These things have to be produced. So you do have just the, reality of life and how we create our systems. They're never going to be perfect, but they should aim to do what the good purpose they were designed for. So we're going to be talking about the two main levers of change that we see if we're trying to move to a system of personalism or economic personalism. The two things that are going to make the most dramatic difference quickly, and this is the basis of some legislation we call the Economic Democracy Act, is to look at those two particular levers of change and see how they can be directed towards connecting every human being to the processes of growth, economic growth, and thereby be self-sufficient and be able to interact in politics in a good way, not the way we're doing today, which is just becoming more corrupt and just more chaotic than ever. And people are actually losing interest in being involved unless things get so bad and they get so angry that's when they get involved. But that's really not a good political system.
Yeah, that's what you're seeing is what Don addressed a little bit earlier, was you've got three things, all of which come under the heading of liberal democracy. You've got the collectivist form of liberal democracy. I get these categories from Alexis de Tocqueville, although we kind of gave our own names to them. The collectivist form of liberal democracy is that humanity as a whole is sovereign. Humanity as a whole has rights. And of course, you see the problem with that immediately in that humanity as a whole is an abstraction. It's a creation of the human mind. And if you claim that humanity as a whole has rights, an abstraction created by man is greater than man created by God, meaning that man can create more than God can create. This causes a little bit of confusion with collectivism. And elitism or individualism is not much better, because you still have an abstraction, this tiny elite that thinks they're better than everyone else. Oh, excuse me, they don't think it, they know it. And they may pay lip service and say, well, if these people had the guts and gumption to be as good as we are, after all, when I inherited $30 billion from my parents, that proved how much I deserved it, didn't it? So that what you see in today's world is that you've got the collectivist form of liberal democracy and the elitist form of liberal democracy merging, because they both share basically the same assumption that somehow sovereignty resides in an abstraction, not in the human person. What we don't see enough of today, or at all, as far as I can tell, is what Alexis de Tocqueville called the American form of liberal democracy that he, described in Democracy in America in the 1830s. The human person is sovereign. This is the basis of the personalism of John Paul II and Martin Luther King. It is the basis of what, with a few flaws, they were pretty big flaws, but what you saw in America in the 1830s, where the individual was considered sovereign, if you are a white male over the age of 21 anyway. And what you see today is what the emergence of what Hilaire Belloc called the servile state. He put it in terms of capitalism and socialism merging, but we can put it in terms of the collectivist form of liberal democracy and the elitist form of liberal democracy finding common economic and political ground and forming the servile state. Not in the form that Hilaire Belloc saw, where you'd be forced to work at a job whether or not you wanted to, but that the state is desperately trying to find and create jobs for anybody who wants one. I mean, it's the same thing. It's totally focused on human beings as inputs to production or votes to get you into office, not as sovereign individuals who should have access to all the institutions of society and to the means to use them according to the best of their ability, which is the basis of what we call personalism and is applied in economic personalism in something like the Economic Democracy Act.
So I didn't know whether Steve wanted to ask the next question.
Oh, yeah, you already went to it. It was, what are the two keys? I was looking at it going, all right, well, you got the two keys, money, credit, and tax. I would throw in and say, well, you got to have education and politics to get to the money, credit, and tax. Because if you get good statesmen in, and, I keep saying, that whole act locally, think locally thing, if, like today, if good people running for the state, county, city councils, especially the state legislatures, we get some good governors like in Virginia right now. Hopefully that McCulloch will go the way of the dodo bird soon. You get guys in there with common sense and not trying to be basically like, want to be authoritarian dictators, then you can get good money and credit and tax policy going. And DC, to me, DC's gone. So if you see balkanization happening, then you can fix money and credit and tax policies on a local level, whereas everything's trying to go global, and that's where you run into a lot like the IMF guys saying they want digital currency and get rid of cash. And you got the guys like COP26 talking about wanting to do carbon taxes, which one of them actually said that's not realistic to do. So to me, I see that as education. You got to get people to know what the heck's going on, to get them in politics. Then you can get the money, credit, and tax policies fixed. But yeah, they're key. But the other two are key to those key, right?
Yeah, that's a good point, Steve. And that's, it's one of those chicken or the egg situations we're in, that when you have a really new idea, new framework for living together, it's formed. It's not in people's minds. It's not something that they understand immediately. It takes, as you say, it takes education. And then you have to get it into politics, because ultimately your institutions and laws are what remains even after each of us as individuals have left this mortal plane. There's going to be these social habits left, these structures and laws that is one of those social structures. And we want to have the right kind of laws that do the least amount of damage, but also make it possible for each person to access all of those institutions in order to develop. So you're absolutely correct. And, we should look at technology also enables us to do things we could never have dreamed about even, 50 years ago. So it has tremendous promise, but it's also can be tremendously dangerous. And you mentioned these cryptocurrencies or digital currencies replacing cash. Well, and that's going to get into, and we've had several shows on money and credit, why those are so significant. But the key thing is not so much the form of the money, it's what is backing the money. And what is backing today's money, this is every single country, it's government debt. So what we're saying is, you have to reflect reality, what has actually been produced, what will be produced, and how you bring new technologies into existence and who will own them. Because a key thing to remember is who has access to money will have access to ownership, both of present wealth and future wealth. And our system of money and credit is what we would call it's past savings based, that in order to get more, you have to already have. It's also the notion, as Mike is, an expert in, the different approach to money. One is the notion that government creates money, the currency principle, or the other idea, which is what we embrace, the banking principle, is saying, you actually create money, anything of value that can be exchanged, or money, even getting more to the fundamental essence of money, it's a way of measuring value in transactions. You have to have a way of two or more parties coming to an agreement that when they exchange one thing for another, that it is of equal value. And so money becomes that measurement. So if we think of money as Mike says, Scrooge McDuck sitting on his mountains of gold coins, yeah, that is one form of money. But we need to look at a form of money that can help grow the economy in a healthy way, meaning it is not concentrating power. It's spreading out power without taking away from those who now own, that it's bringing about true production, not speculation. I mean, it makes me just shudder when I hear that, what was the coin, digital currency based on the Squid Game,
Oh, yeah.
how the value of that went from a couple cents to $30 to $1,000, and then it's below zero, okay, in a very short period of time. If that's the basis of our money system, we're cooked. You know, there's no reality. There's no reality. It's pure betting. It's gambling. We have to look at money as a way of bringing about new things, new technologies that use less energy, that use less polluting forms of energy, that use resources. I think the idea, for example, this is what little I know, the idea of always making sure things get reused, that you don't leave pollution out there, you use that as a resource. And so they call it the circular economy. And I don't know if there's other aspects which we might not agree with, but from a physical science standpoint, it makes sense to me because it sounds like what nature does. Nature doesn't just leave things out there never to be used again. Everything gets reused. So that's technological, but it's also based on our philosophy of how we grow. And then we have to know how are we going to pay for that? And so that's our money system. And then the tax policy, and this is touches on some history of how the employee stock ownership plan got into law and became popular to a certain extent. And that was that corporations were encouraged. There were certain incentives that were created for the ESOP, which no other method of finance has. There's a lot of things that we would change about it, you know, including the fact that it's in retirement law versus its own ownership law. But by enabling companies to finance their growth and be able to deduct not only interest expenses, but also principal, it's the only form of finance that will allow that. And now you even have something more advanced, which enables a corporation not to pay any corporate taxes, but to pass through the earnings of the profits of a company to the owners, and then they are going to be responsible for paying their personal tax. So
like with money, with the IMF guy who was talking about, I guess the opposite, we keep talking about owned or be owned. He's literally come out saying we can't control someone that uses like $100 bill, but we can control if it's digital, how somebody can use, if they're even allowed to use it, etc. If I go to Don or Michael and make a transaction and go, here's $10 and they trade it off, they can't control that part. But if it goes through a phone to a phone or something like that, that can be controlled.
Yeah, well, I think, you know,
what you're seeing in today's system is and Don used exactly the right word, form. What we see is a triumph of form over substance. In other words, take every one of the 5 levers of change. It's education. Well, if you get a degree, that means you get a good job. Well, what is that degree in? What did you learn? Can you, do you know grammar? Do you know math? Did you actually have to learn anything in order to get that degree that guarantees you absolutely a good job?
I learned where to get the good chicken wings and beer was.
Yeah.
That's a start.
You're lucky. Politics. Well, everybody knows that if you have the vote, you have immense power and you're a democratic society and you're a free person. And everything's fine because voting is politics. Well, no, that's one form of it. But if you have no power yourself, all you're doing is selecting somebody with power to control you, as you pointed out. And money and credit. If only the government has the ability to issue money and back it with its own debt, guess who controls all transactions or even the ability to make transactions? And if you switch to a completely digital currency that cannot be initiated by anybody except the issuers of the digital currency, as you point out, every aspect of the economy can be controlled by whoever issues that currency. I mean, form over substance. But if you have the substance of there, you know, the bank, what we call the banking principle, is that money is how I exchange what I produce for what you produce. At its heart, that's all that money is in the banking, under the banking principle. If there's no production, there can be no money. Well, Keynesian economics says exactly the opposite. And Keynesian, I once wrote a book that didn't get accepted because it was too controversial.
No.
Catholic Keynesians and Other Mythical Creatures. And
I think you might be able to get that published today, though. I think I know some people.
It needs a little bit of reworking because I've learned a lot since I wrote it. Mm-hmm. But one of the key features in it was, and I got this from, oh darn it, I can't remember the scientist's name, but he referred to cargo cult science. Now, if you know anything about the cargo cults, they are the weirdest thing you ever came across. They started in the late 1890s, but really hit their stride in World War II, when in the South Pacific, there were certain islands in which the natives believed that God created all these wonderful trade goods like Spam and Coca-Cola and metal tools in his great cargo workshops in heaven. And the white people, the white soldiers and the Marines and the Navy had secret code words and secret prayers by which they could influence, and God would give them this great cargo. And all you had to do was build these airstrips or piers and fake airplanes and cargo warehouses. And if you said exactly the right invocation, the cargo would come. Well, this is Keynesian economics. In Keynesian economics, if you print up enough money and throw it around with the right rituals and say the right incantations, prosperity will come. Production comes from money, rather than the banking principle. And what we say in economic personalism is that no, money comes from production.
I'm starting to think of that Clark and Dawes video I sent you guys. Push it out so it goes facing the window because it creates a vacuum. Make sure the paper's turned up. Hit hey, you're just printing money up. Are you in banking? No. He's not even in banking. No. He figured the whole thing out.
Saying to them,
well, perhaps I should just take you through what we're telling them to do.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I won't go into a lot of detail.
No, that's
be indiscreet, but this will give you an idea of how quantitative easing works.
Yep.
Take printer out of box and place on table with the out tray facing the window.
The out tray facing the window.
That's right. Load paper into the paper receptacle and place currency on glass tray F.
Right.
Check alignment by printing out a test page.
Right.
Go into copy settings and select double-sided and the number of copies you require.
How many would you suggest?
In the case of one of our clients, it's 80 billion, 120 billion in the case of another client, and one client wants 1 trillion of these things.
Can you get printers to do that?
No, you can't. You're going to need a bank of them. I mean, it's a multi-printer
big
job.
Ones,
yeah, big industrial strength. Yeah. Big like a Bofors gun, all facing the window.
Yeah.
Once you've ascertained that you have the alignment correct, you alert the banking sector, open the window and press copy.
And stand well back.
Yes, you've got to stand well back because they can create a bit of a vacuum while reaching cruising height.
Whereabouts?
In the super fund industry very often.
And you'd have to consider the wind direction too.
Oh yeah, you don't want to be doing this upwind.
No, because you'd get covered in pretend money, couldn't you?
Covered in what?
Pretend money.
No, this is not pretend money. This is real currency we're creating.
But aren't you just printing it off? I mean, these are photocopies, aren't they?
Excuse me. Dave, this is not going to work. Because I've just explained it to a bloke and he saw through it straight away. Are you in banking?
No.
No, he's not even in the banking racket. Okay, I'll try that.
Try what?
Have you ever heard of Rumpelstiltskin?
No.
Good. Now we're getting somewhere. Pull up a chair. I'll tell you a tale.
Yeah, they won't understand banking and currency principle. But I think it is important to look at what is money, what's the purpose of money, what is good, sound money, and what is monopoly paper money. And what we have today is really monopoly paper money that people have attached value to, but in their exchanges, they're not thinking about exchanging production, they're just trying to bid up the price. And so it becomes sort of a game of musical chairs that someone at the end of this whole thing is going to be left standing up and out of the chair.
Well, Mike will love this one. I gave this Indian guy, when I was doing Uber, he was telling me he just got married. I gave him a miraculous medal and said, hey, here's a congratulations for getting married. And he goes, oh, no, thank you very much. When you have this, remember me. He gave me 1,000 rupees. I think toilet paper is more profitable than rupees.
Than rupees, yeah.
Oh, you think that's bad? When I took the last business law course I took, for review for my CPA, continuing education, we watched a slideshow about the it wasn't hyperinflation, but the high inflation in Kenya. And one of the slides was the sign posted on a latrine saying, please do not use paper money as toilet paper.
Yep, that's about it. So I think the point that we want to make in terms of turning this into something practical, all these ideas we're talking about, is going to take legislation. Otherwise it's sort of hit or miss, and it's not going to be enough to change the way we operate as a society. And I think it's also important to realize that whether we like it or not, we are interconnected with the rest of the world. I mean, you can see the whole problem with supply chains just being shut down, and the reliance on people in other countries to provide certain other things. And so as long as you're going to have exchanges, you're going to have money involved. So we want to make sure that money, wherever it's used, is backed by real production, and that it's something that's accessible to every person. And we don't mean just throwing around cash. We're talking about money being in the form of credit, capital credit, or credit to buy productive assets, that is not based on anyone's past savings. This is created as production is needed to be brought into reality. That becomes, through our monetary systems, and this includes our central banks, it's brought into being matched with the needs of businesses to acquire more productive assets to grow, but to do so to finance their growth in ways that create new owners. So if the same people have access to new money and credit, the same people are going to own the new technologies, new assets. If more people are able to have access to a sound money system and a sound credit system, and that includes how you deal with risk of loans going bad. And we have an idea, that using capital credit insurance becomes part of a good system, so that people, the have-nots, are not excluded because they don't have enough collateral. Okay, this becomes a substitute for how you handle risk, another form of collateral, which is capital credit insurance. So if we create the right money and credit system so that you're really creating money only for private sector needs to grow, not government debt, not gambling on Wall Street, and you do so, you make this credit, because really, if you look at who, as a human right, we have to recognize that ownership, private property ownership, is a basic human right. We also have to see that if you need to have access, equal access to this, access to the means to become an owner. You can just say everyone has the right to be an owner, but if you don't have a way of becoming an owner without taking away, property rights from someone else, you're back at square one. But fortunately, and this is something Louis Kelso was genius, pure genius. I think Mike, being the historian, will say that he filled in a hole in terms of what the encyclicals were calling for, that without it, you would always be stuck in the old systems. So really, I think that people, as they understand and are not intimidated by the idea of money and credit for the right purposes, you're going to see a shift in just attitudes to an ownership culture, which is one where people recognize, you have power, I have power. We have to be responsible too for how we use our power. So that's also part of ownership, the notion of responsibility going along with rights. rights and duties.
Yeah.
So that's, yeah. So I think I'll let Mike.
Well, what I was going to say is that what Don's been saying can be summarized. We do, go into this in the book, Economic Personalism. But what you basically have today are three types of money, two of which are legitimate. One, the one that most people think is around, is past savings money. Money that represents and is backed by existing production, existing inventories of goods and that sort of thing. Then you have future and past savings money is best used for consumption or speculation or gambling, if that's what you want to do, which qualifies as consumption because you're spending it. Two, you've got future savings money. This is the type of money that you want to use for financially feasible new capital projects. And if used properly, it can turn everyone into an owner. This is money that is backed by the present value of the future stream of income to be generated by the new capital and then can be paid back. You create money and then you pay it, and then you pay it back and cancel it so that there's no inflation or deflation. There's always enough money in the economy to do the job, whether it's the past savings money for existing production or the future savings money for new capital investment. Unfortunately, what you have, and it's growing in popularity, I guess is the right word, every day, is the no savings money. This is money issued by governments, backed by government debt. This is most of the cryptocurrencies. They just create a currency. Well, what's it backed by? Well, nothing. It's a pure commodity that we create out of nothing that you can use. And unfortunately, you heard us mention the currency principle versus the banking principle. The banking principle is that money is a way of measuring transactions and of exchanging what I produce for what you produce. Money comes from production. In the currency principle, production comes from money, and money and credit are themselves a production, a commodity that somebody first has to create, usually government, and then you are permitted to carry out economic transactions. What's behind it? Oh, the government's word. So in other words, the people that are telling me what I'm permitted to do are also telling me how I can do it and if I can do it by controlling completely the money supply. This was Keynes's dream in his treatise on money, which was supposed to be his magnum opus until Friedrich von Hayek tore it to shreds, except Friedrich von Hayek missed the most collectivist and totalitarian thing that Keynes said, and he said it in the first couple of paragraphs of the 2-volume work, which is that the state has the power to re-edit the dictionary and determine what money is and what it's worth, and it can change it at any time it wants.
So that's how you control the marketplace. I do want to make one quick point. And since we mentioned tax policy, why is this so significant in changing the system? Well, today the tax system has largely become a way for government to redistribute from those who produce to those who are unable to produce sufficiently. It's not set up, because it becomes a welfare state distributor, it becomes a way, of necessity, has to keep increasing taxes on those who produce at any level. And it's usually the middle class who's really going to end up paying for most of these, because the rich can hire fancy accountants and lawyers to send their money overseas. Yeah, so it becomes really it's when you talk about a nanny state, that term is, it's actually becomes, it means something. What we see the tax system as doing, as I said, you want minimal powers vested in the state, just to make sure that there is order, that the general welfare is protected, that every individual's rights are protected. That we have security, and it's basically, it's there to care for the common good, as Mike said. But the problem is the way the tax system is set up, it has no impact or very little on changing the patterns of ownership. There is the ESOP, Employee Stock Ownership Plan, not option plan. The problem is that only covers corporate employees. It doesn't cover public sector workers. It doesn't cover people in the military. It doesn't cover parents who stay home to raise children. It doesn't cover children. So you are pretty much excluding, the majority of the population from the opportunity to become an owner. The ESOP works great. It proved that principle of finance, that you can turn a non-owner into an owner without taking anything away from present owners. And it's all done on future profits of the corporation. The problem is most corporations, the way they're going to finance their growth is basically keeping the ownership patterns within the people who already own. So that if you want to become an owner, you have to go through that arduous process of working hard, saving, and then investing on Wall Street, which is just speculation. So it doesn't really turn the ordinary person into a real investor. So by using the tax system to encourage the corporation to pay out its profits, so it's actually a carrot. The carrot is if you pay out all of your dividends, all your profits as dividends to the owners, then you get to deduct that. So the corporation could actually end up not paying any corporate income tax, which is a good thing even for current owners because they're paying double and triple tax. So this is a carrot.
I'm talking right now, so I'm off camera. But
whoops, Mike is talking. This is something which we can look at in terms of creating incentives. So that businesses will, they may not immediately feel comfortable with the idea of sharing future ownership opportunities with anyone, including their workers. But as this becomes more obviously a better way to finance growth, I mean, it's more cost effective, and Mike is a CPA, he can show you the numbers for that. As that becomes more recognized as a better way to grow, because you're also creating customers with money to buy your products, then you're going to see a transition, and we would hope as swiftly as possible, but it will be perhaps evolutionary, depending on education again, and depending on politics. So this is something that all of our systems can start to have an effect on our culture, where every human being is truly free and able to develop to their fullest human potential.
All right, so picture a website, show it, tell everybody how to get the book for the umpteenth time.
Yay! Yes.
Not the
Buy it.
just the
Give
10.
it to your family and friends.
And if you can't afford it, there's a free version available too.
There you go.
What's the website?
www.cesj.org.
And here's the free book it's on the screen. Here's the free version of it. Or you can just go to Amazon and send $10 to Bezos, and he will gladly send it to you for probably free of charge for however they get around that. Anyways, Michael,
until he finds out what's in it, you mean?
Yeah. Send one to him. Michael, Don, appreciate it as always. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve. It's been great.
And go check out the shirt and check out the store and get your own. I would like to see them come out with from card magnets. I'll put that on the car tomorrow if there was on there. Hint, hint.
Okay. Okay, we can arrange that.
I'll make a public challenge instead.
Okay, yeah. No, this is we can get all sorts of things available. So car magnets it is.
Whiskey decanters, coffee cups, you name it,
There you go. All right, well, thank you guys.